Troy Whitaker still remembered the smell of pipe tobacco and old books in his grandfather's study. The room had always felt like another world. Dark oak shelves lined with worn volumes, a ticking grandfather clock in the corner, and the quiet scratch of a pen on paper. His grandfather, Arthur Whitaker, believed in two things more than anything else: education and integrity. "Troy," he said once, sliding a worn leather journal across the desk, "money is only useful if it opens doors, and education opens the most important ones." Troy was 13 then. He nodded seriously, though he didn't yet understand how important those words would become. Troy's father died in a car accident when he was 10. He was very close to his dad and was devastated over the loss. A short time later, his grandfather reached out to Troy, and the two began spending quality time together. Troy loved it when his grandfather talked about his dad as a boy and reminded him how much his dad loved him. It helped make the loss of his dad a little less painful. His grandfather taught him about honesty, integrity, and how your word is as sacred as a handshake. The two became inseparable. Sadly, 3 years later, Arthur Whitaker passed away peacefully in his sleep. And with his passing came something unexpected: an inheritance meant solely for Troy. The family gathered in a stiff, overly decorated law office. Troy sat quietly beside his mother, while the rest of the Whitaker relatives filled the room with uncomfortable tension. His Aunt Deborah, Dad's sister, sat perfectly dressed and always smiling too widely. His Uncle Gerald, Aunt Deborah's husband, who always smelled of expensive cologne and impatience. And their children, who whispered constantly while pretending not to stare at Troy. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Arthur Whitaker's estate has been divided according to his final will and testament." Several small properties went to different family members. Deborah's smile faded slightly as the list continued. Then came the final statement. The remainder of Arthur Whitaker's estate, totaling approximately $1.8 million, is placed in trust for his grandson, Troy Whitaker, to be released upon his 18th birthday for educational purposes. Silence fell over the room. Deborah's lips tightened. Gerald leaned back slowly. Troy blinked in surprise. He didn't know the amount, but his grandfather clearly believed in him. For a while, everything seemed normal. A legal trust was established. Deborah volunteered to help oversee family matters. Gerald assisted with investment guidance. Troy was only 16, and the adults assured him everything was being handled properly. 2 years later, Troy turned 18. He walked into the bank with quiet excitement. College acceptance letters were already sitting on his desk at home. But when the banker pulled up the trust account, her expression shifted. "I'm sorry," she said carefully. "The account balance is extremely low." "How low?" Troy asked. $312. The number hit him like a punch. "What about the rest?" he asked weakly. The banker hesitated. "The funds were withdrawn over the last 18 months. "By who?" She turned the monitor toward him. The signatures belonged to Deborah Whitaker and Gerald Whitaker. Most of Troy's family pretended nothing was wrong. Deborah insisted the money had been used for investment opportunities. Gerald claimed the market had simply turned against them. But Troy knew something was off. Then someone unexpectedly stepped forward. His father's older brother, Uncle Brian. Brian Whitaker was the family outsider. He wasn't rich. He wasn't polished. He ran a small auto shop on the edge of town and had a reputation for saying exactly what he thought. When Troy told him what happened, Brian's jaw tightened. "They stole from you," he said flatly. "They said the investments failed." Brian snorted. "Funny thing about investments, they leave trails." He leaned back in his chair. "And I know someone who likes following trails." Brian introduced Troy to Lydia Chen, a forensic accountant. Quiet, brilliant, relentless. Within days, she began digging through financial records, transfers, shell accounts, property purchases. The truth slowly emerged like ink spreading across paper. Deborah and Gerald had never invested the money. They had stolen it. The trust account had been drained into personal accounts, disguised as business ventures. Luxury cars, a vacation condo, private school tuition for their own kids. Lydia printed the evidence in a thick stack of documents. "This is fraud," she said calmly, "and it's not subtle." Brian smiled. "Good." Deborah arrived at court wearing her most confident smile. Gerald strutted behind her. They believed Troy was a naive kid who couldn't possibly challenge them. Their lawyer opened with a calm explanation of unfortunate financial losses. But then, Brian stood up. He wasn't a lawyer, but he had hired a very good one. And their strategy was simple. Let the truth speak. Lydia took the stand first. For 3 hours, she dismantled Deborah and Gerald's story piece by piece. Every transfer, every purchase, every lie. The courtroom grew silent as the evidence mounted. Deborah's smile disappeared. Gerald stopped making eye contact. Then came the final blow. Arthur Whitaker's leather journal. Inside it were handwritten notes detailing his intentions for Troy's education fund. Even more damaging? The journal included a clause. Arthur had anticipated the possibility of family interference. He had written instructions authorizing penalty enforcement for misuse of the trust. The judge leaned forward slowly. "That means," she said, "not only was the money stolen, but the perpetrators are liable for repayment, damages, and court-imposed penalties." Deborah's face went pale. Gerald looked like he might faint. The ruling was swift. Deborah and Gerald were ordered to repay the entire $1.8 million, pay $600,000 in punitive damages, cover all legal fees, and face public court sanctions for breach of fiduciary duty. But the worst punishment wasn't the money. It was the humiliation. The court transcript became public record. Local news picked up the story. The Whitaker relatives who once mocked Troy suddenly avoided eye contact in public. Deborah's perfect reputation shattered overnight. Gerald's business partnerships evaporated. Their greed had cost them everything. 6 months later, Troy stood on a quiet college campus. The trees rustled softly in the fall wind. In his backpack was the acceptance packet to one of the best universities in the country. His grandfather's money, restored and protected, had made it possible. Brian walked beside him. "So," Brian said with a grin, "you're officially richer than the rest of us again." Troy laughed. It was never about the money. Brian raised an eyebrow. "Your grandfather knew that." They sat on a bench overlooking the campus library. Troy pulled the old leather journal from his bag. Inside the first page was a sentence Arthur Whitaker had written years ago. "Truth is patient. It always finds its way to the surface." Troy smiled. And for the first time since his grandfather passed away, the future felt exactly like the promise Arthur had always believed in. Wide open. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the subscribe button. Thank you.